Anthony stood motionless by the grave of his late wife, gazing at the dark letters etched into the cold granite of the headstone. Quietly and barely audibly, he murmured something to himself, as if trying to convey his thoughts to someone who could no longer hear them. His daughter, named Sharon, stood a little farther away, gently biting her lip, attentively scrutinizing each letter, expressing the bitter promise, "We will never forget you." It would soon be 2 years since Elizabeth had perished beneath the wheels of a reckless drunk driver, leaving an endless void in Anthony and Sharon's hearts. It all happened when she was hurrying to the cafe where they were supposed to meet as a family. Anthony was celebrating his anniversary, and as usual, before preparing a home-cooked dinner for the guests, he decided to have a small gathering with only the closest relatives. Of course, Sharon arrived first as soon as her classes at the institute allowed. She wanted to bring a smile and a warm hug to her father, but Elizabeth was running late, and Anthony began to feel the nerves building up inside him. He called her twice to confirm when to expect her, growing slightly annoyed that she insisted on going to the cafe separately. She promised she would join them soon since she always found time for a walk in the fresh air. Just 15 minutes after his last conversation with Elizabeth, Anthony received a call from the same number. The voice on the other end reported an unimaginable loss. Elizabeth was no longer with them. Doctors who arrived at the scene could do nothing. Her death had been instantaneous. The reckless driver, responsible for this tragedy, was soon apprehended despite his attempts to flee the accident scene. But the woman in the prime of her life had been lost forever. Anthony felt like the world was crumbling around him, and he couldn't find his place. He cancelled all planned meetings with suppliers and avoided any social events for 2 days. Only with immense willpower did he force himself back to reality. He had to bear the burden of his wife's funeral alone, and he also had to participate in the legal proceedings that resulted in a harsh sentence for the reckless driver. After finishing his prayers and ceasing his quiet murmuring, Anthony turned his gaze to his daughter, who stood nearby. He wanted to understand how she was feeling. He asked gently and with concern, "Do you have anything to say to your mother, Sharon?" His daughter replied with restraint but with deep sorrow in her voice, "I've already talked to her, Dad. Let's go home, just the 2 of us, without inviting anyone." Anthony nodded, understanding that it wasn't a moment for loud gatherings. Sharon took her father's hand and led him to the car, enveloping him in warmth and support. Sharon took the driver's seat, securing her seatbelt carefully first and foremost. Anthony nodded in approval, expressing his admiration. "Well done. You need to take care of yourself, Sharon." The young woman responded with tenderness, gently patting his head. "Yes, Dad, I know." Leaving the cemetery, she momentarily felt a weight on her shoulders and cast a glance towards the grave. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she barely held them back. Every visit to such a place, especially to the grave of a loved one, always brought pain and longing, even after a considerable amount of time had passed. Back at home, Sharon set a modest meal on the table. Her father ate in silence, without any enthusiasm. His loss was too great. In contrast, Sharon felt a slight hunger, and she carefully finished her pancakes with honey and the leftover porridge almost in its entirety. At that moment, it seemed to her like a small step towards returning to everyday life. Anthony pushed his half-eaten lunch away and listlessly said, "I'm going to lie down in the living room. I'm feeling tired." Sharon responded with understanding, "Okay, Dad, rest." As Anthony fell asleep, she gently covered him with a light blanket, making sure he was comfortable on the couch. This year, Sharon managed to achieve 2 significant goals simultaneously. Firstly, she successfully graduated from college and earned her diploma with honors. Secondly, she secured a prestigious position within her father's company. Anthony had always valued professionalism and dedication, and he had no doubt about his daughter's abilities and foresight. Without hesitation, he appointed her as the company's commercial director. Sharon effortlessly transitioned into her new role and, within a month, delivered visible results. Anthony's company secured a profitable contract for the supply of high-tech equipment. After the successful deal, her father warmly praised his daughter for her achievements and wished her not to stop but to keep moving forward, striving for new heights. While Anthony was asleep on the living room couch, Sharon decided to make use of her free time to tidy up the house. She gathered the items, sent them for laundry, and then proceeded with her work responsibilities. Sitting at her computer, on her shoulders lay the responsibility of reviewing reports and planning meetings for the next week. Her father also requested that she include a trip to another city in the plan for negotiations with potential investors. He ambitiously planned to expand the market and participate in significant social projects. Hearing her father cough, Sharon left her room and headed towards him. "How was your rest?" she asked, expressing concern. Anthony nodded. "The fatigue has passed." Then, out of the blue, he suggested something unexpected. "By the way, I was thinking, why don't we consider a country house?" Sharon appreciated her father's bold new idea. "Do you want to go there just for weekends? Or?" Anthony gazed at his daughter attentively and, without letting her finish, completed her thought. "I think we could benefit from being closer to nature." "Dad, that's a wonderful idea. I've been wanting to suggest that you move out of the city for a while. It's not only better for work but also fresh air, fewer noisy neighbors, and most importantly, a garden." Sharon enthusiastically applauded her idea. Anthony nodded in agreement, realizing that they had both been dreaming of such a change for a long time. But suddenly, his brows furrowed, and he added, "Yes, we did forget about the garden." Sharon smiled dreamily. "I want to revive the garden and build a greenhouse." Anthony was ready to support this idea, but she added a condition, improving their future plans. "I have one condition." "What is it?" her father inquired. "We'll need to convert the third floor into an attic," Sharon announced her condition, which would enhance their future plans. "But there's so much clutter up there. We used it as storage for the attic. Can't we leave it as it is?" objected her father, seeing that renovating the third floor would require hiring builders and a lot of time. Sharon was persistent. "No, I want to set up a telescope there and observe the stars, and I need my own home office." Anthony understood that this was important to his daughter, and improving the house was inevitable. "Of course, sweetheart, the attic and renovation, and while we're at it, we'll sort through the old stuff. It's been 2 years since we said goodbye to Mom, and the house has remained in this state." He agreed. "Okay, it's a deal, but let's start next week because our upcoming days are already scheduled," Sharon suggested. "Agreed. We'll start next week." Her father consented. "Don't forget to prepare the documents for the medical corporation for me tomorrow. I promise to discuss equipment deliveries with them at a discount." "I'm almost finished sending them to your email." Sharon returned to her room and completed the process of sending the documents. She always approached her work with great responsibility and did not allow herself to relax. In the company, she had to closely monitor discipline because in the past month, she had to let go of 2 employees who were caught attempting financial irregularities. The next day, the father and daughter went to the company's office together. Anthony received business partners in his office, discussing new prospects, while his daughter monitored the markets, prepared the ground for new deals, and kept an eye on current company processes. Work was in full swing, and there was hardly any free time. However, Anthony decided to find a moment and dropped by his daughter's office to check how everything was going. "We have the contracts in our pocket. I've sorted everything out," he boasted, pointing to a substantial folder. "And here's what, I managed to find a reputable construction company. They'll send specialists soon to inspect the third floor." Sharon was prepared to take on part of the responsibility. "I can go there and show them around." Anthony pondered, realizing that this could be a good idea. "Maybe we'll do it together. I want to oversee how they prepare the estimate." Sharon was ready to play any role. "I'm always ready to help, Dad." Anthony took his daughter by the shoulders and looked into her eyes. "And you know, dear, I trust you completely. No doubts. Where do you get such ideas?" "Maybe I take after Mom. She was sometimes quite particular," Sharon quietly said. Anthony shrugged, agreeing. "What's done is done." And on the outside, as she used to say, "You're the spitting image of your great-grandmother." Although I've never seen her, or rather, a photograph of her, so I have nothing to compare with. Sharon proposed an interesting idea. Dad, we can find out, Anthony asked with disbelief. And how exactly? Are we going to have a séance with great-grandma? Sharon waved off with a smile. No, nothing like that will be necessary. I assumed that in the third floor, as you called it, the attic, some things might have been preserved. Perhaps there's a photo album there, where family pictures probably still exist. That's an idea, dear. Anthony praised Sharon for her resourcefulness. Sharon didn't care much for excessive praise and responded modestly, "Don't flatter me, or I might get a big head. Then in 2 days, if no other issues arise, we'll go to the house and decide everything on the spot," Anthony suggested. Exactly. No need to delay any longer. A house without a master's touch stands idle for too long. Before you know it, it'll fall into disrepair, and then the ghosts will start flying around, Anthony added with humor. Dad, are you serious? Sharon asked with concern, alarmed by the talk of ghosts. Anthony couldn't resist and smiled. No, I'm just joking. He kissed his daughter on the cheek and returned to his office. Until evening, he dealt with routine tasks, focusing on documents and contracts. It seemed that Anthony had decided to deal with paperwork as much as possible to free up time for the upcoming trip to the countryside. The idea of fixing up the house had become important and decisive for him. With fervent inspiration, Sharon took on solving all the organizational issues, and in 2 incredibly busy days, she achieved incredible success. In her mind, picturesque scenes of her and her father gazing at the stars through a telescope were already taking shape. She deeply believed that it would be much better, for after the loss of her mother, her father had become her unwavering pillar in this turbulent life. Of course, Sharon had relatives from all sides, but they so rarely appeared in her life and remained in touch that their faces floated in her memory like forgotten scraps of dreams. She couldn't always remember their names. Nevertheless, having her father's presence was enough for Sharon. He was simultaneously her mother, grandmother, and grandfather, and everyone else who had ever meant something to their family. Anthony realized that his daughter looked at him as a reliable anchor, like a solid stone wall. At the same time, his soul burned with the desire to pass control of the entire company to her as soon as possible. He sought to share with her all the knowledge and experience he had accumulated over many years in business to ensure her successful future and avoid potential mistakes. 2 days flew by imperceptibly, and it was time to go to the countryside house. Anthony got in touch with the construction company again to clarify the details, and they agreed to meet in 2 hours. Sharon changed into comfortable and spacious clothing, and her father also decided to forego his business suit to spend the day in a more relaxed setting. At the appointed time, specialists were waiting in front of the house, and Anthony greeted them warmly, opening the gates and letting them into the house. One of the specialists was an estimator and promptly went to the 3rd floor where the attic was located. After looking around, he shook his head with an expression of serious concern. There's a lot of work to be done. We need to put in serious effort to make everything right, the specialist said. Anthony replied, expressing trust in the specialists. We rely on your experience. The main thing is for the attic to become truly beautiful and functional. That won't be a problem. We have significant experience in carrying out such projects. Let's go downstairs and discuss all the details in detail, confidently affirmed the second specialist, who turned out to be the foreman. Anthony turned to his daughter. Darling, stay here and listen to what else the estimator will say. He went downstairs with the foreman to discuss the project details. Sharon stayed with the estimator, feeling a personal responsibility to understand all aspects of the reconstruction. Are you sure you can handle the attic? Sharon asked. The estimator nodded and smiled, saying, Of course, we're prepared to turn the space into anything you want, even an orangery. But, honestly, there are many old items here that need to be removed before we can start work. We can handle the cleanup ourselves, my father and I. For now, focus on your estimates, Sharon firmly instructed. It took the specialists 2 hours to carefully discuss and finalize the attic project. However, in a prudent move, Anthony decided not to sign the contract on the spot. Instead, he proposed, "Let my daughter and me take some time to think about it. We'll make a final decision tomorrow or the day after." The specialists nodded in agreement, saying, "All right, we'll wait for your call." The foreman and the estimator left the house, leaving father and daughter with serious thoughts about the future of the attic and the upcoming reconstruction. "So, what do you think, darling? Do you like the project?" Anthony asked with a serious look. "Yes, it's perfect," Sharon replied, showing her approval with a circular motion of her fingers. "Then let's start going through our things," her father suggested. "With pleasure. I can't wait to access the attic." Sharon began pulling out boxes and started active preparations for the upcoming reconstruction. Anthony took on bulkier items, carefully taking out a chest of drawers. However, in the process, a small box accidentally fell from the chest. He picked it up from the floor and looked at it curiously. "What do you think is inside?" he asked his daughter, turning the box in his hands. "Maybe great-grandmother's photos? Although, why would she hide them?" Sharon speculated, shrugging her shoulders. "I don't know," Anthony replied, somewhat doubtful about the possibility of old photos being inside the box. "Let's open it and find out the secret it was keeping," Sharon said. "Exciting, isn't it?" "Most likely. It's Mom's box, and she seemed quite nervous about it. On the other hand, she's no longer with us, so perhaps it's time to unveil the mystery." With caution, they opened the box and found inside not photographs, but a thin leather-bound diary with golden edges. It was labeled "My Secrets" with the owner's name. Looking at his daughter, Anthony asked cautiously, "Changed your mind? Reading this diary might be a very intimate and personal intrusion into Mom's life." Sharon firmly replied, "No, Dad, let's read it. We can learn more about her and possibly discover something that helps us better understand her." At the beginning of the diary, they found nothing unusual. The mother was recording her thoughts and advice for herself. There were 2 instances where both father and daughter smiled, presumably recalling when these moments had occurred and what they meant. However, in the middle of the diary, they stumbled upon something that left them stunned. Elizabeth, perhaps in a moment of intense emotion or due to her anxious handwriting, confessed to something that nearly left them in shock. She admitted to having made a foolish decision by agreeing to a child substitution. The subsequent text described how this had come about. It turned out that Elizabeth had given birth to a stillborn baby girl in the maternity ward who got entangled in the umbilical cord and suffocated. Elizabeth shared that she was overwhelmed by grief and guilt, particularly mentioning the moment when her daughter was born. With this astonishing revelation in their minds, father and daughter fell into a stunned silence, trying to comprehend the significance and consequences of this remarkable discovery. And they offered her another child, another girl. The birth mother had given up on her. Elizabeth agreed and made room in her heart and her home for this child. Elizabeth and her husband raised her as their own daughter, and despite the physical differences, they were her true parents. To avoid unnecessary questions from her husband, Elizabeth always referred to that same great-grandmother, Anthony said, closing the diary. "Dad, so does that mean?" Sharon's voice trembled, and she began to cry. "Nothing's going to change," he responded sharply. "We'll destroy the diary, and no one will know anything. Everything remains as it was. You're my daughter. I'm your father. And that's the end of it." Anthony's words forever changed Sharon's life. She realized that even if they weren't biologically connected, his love and care for her would never change. Her tears turned into tears of happiness, and she hugged her father again and again. "So, you won't abandon me?" Sharon asked, her voice full of emotion. "Don't talk nonsense," he said, approaching the window. I'm sure Elizabeth had no other choice. Besides, I had been waiting for a child for so long that if she had told me the tragic news, we probably wouldn't be sitting here talking now. "Dad, my dearest, thank you." Sharon cried even harder and clung to her father. Thus, Sharon understood that her father's love wasn't tied to blood relations, and she felt deeply grateful to him for his support and tenderness. These moments brought them even closer, and she felt genuinely happy, knowing she had such a wonderful father. Once they had calmed down and accepted what they had discovered, they resumed the cleanup on the third floor. They needed to get it ready as soon as possible so that the builders could begin the construction of the attic. For Sharon, this day became pivotal. A terrible secret about her birth was revealed, yet her father took it calmly. He did not say he would no longer raise someone else's child. Nevertheless, as a precaution, he had a DNA test done. Anthony wanted to make sure his wife hadn't mixed anything up. It was entirely possible that even the doctors had made a mistake. However, the results showed that Sharon indeed wasn't his daughter. Nevertheless, he chose not to seek her biological parents. The businessman decided to close the chapter on this period of his life. He was still to continue raising his daughter and leading her towards a bright future. From that moment on, Anthony and Sharon's lives took a new direction. They accepted the truth but didn't let it destroy their relationship. Father and daughter were bound by destiny, not by blood ties. Anthony was resolute and tender in his decision to keep the family intact, regardless of the circumstances. Together, they embarked on the future, ready to face any challenges that lay ahead. Sharon knew she had a father who would always be there, supporting and inspiring her, and Anthony decided that nothing could break their family, and he was proud of his daughter, who was a true treasure to him.